Yep. That means delete that.
Delete, okay.
Take that out. Yeah, you don't, the prime should not be there.
Yeah, I realized that. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Cause that sucks, especially right for the
I think because they weren't like, were they exposed, Sydney?
Yeah.
They were? They don't even weren't exposed if the JP just got sick.
Oh, I don't know. I heard there was a.
Okay.
Because he had
Cause
While I went up to my office to retrieve my handout, I saw that there was a sign on Dr. Calkin's door saying he's not going to be in today. So I don't know if you have any classes with him today, but if you do, they might be canceled.
I might listen tomorrow.
Oh.
Dang it. I could've gone.
All right, so let's take out, you probably already have it out, the handout that I asked you to complete for today. And let's go ahead, oh, I think I have a recording of it. Did you guys find the recording of it in Canvas? Did it play for you, Michael? Did it work?
Yeah, did they get it?
I think we may have listened to this last class, but it doesn't hurt to listen to it one more time, so.
I've been through too much already. I'm just locking myself in my room.
So I told you to watch out for clef changes, right? All this is in, both hands are in bass clef right now. Treble clef now on the right hand. All right, so I had asked you to analyze some Roman numerals sporadically throughout, and I put blanks underneath where you needed to do that. And then, of course, I'm mainly looking for the overall chart or graph and the label of the form of this piece. And then I also asked at the top, I put a small blank on what the form is of measures 1 through 8. So, I am planning to collect this today. Does anyone have any questions about anything before I do that? Yeah?
Can you go over the two chords in bars 21 and 22?
21 and 22, you bet. Okay, so we're in both hands are bass clef here. So we gotta make sure we get the notes right. It looks like at the very end of measure 21, I have an F sharp and a B, and then up above that, and this is such a brief chord, it's only a 16th note in length, but up above that I have a D sharp and I have an A. So it looks to me like that is a B, D, F, A type of chord, with B being the root. And I also noticed that there's accidental. The F sharp is part of the key, part of G major, but D sharp doesn't fit in G major. So if it's a B, D sharp, F sharp, A chord, that is a dominant 7th sound with an accidental. And by the way, well, I gave you the keys, yeah. So we're in G major here. How does B, D sharp, F sharp, A? It doesn't fit naturally in the key of G, but what could I call it as a secondary chord in the key of G? A 5,
4, 3,
good, 4, 3 of,
6.
yeah, of a 6. Right? Because if B is the root, it's a dominant of something built on E, and E would be a 6 chord in the key of G. In fact, the very next blank, I think it goes to a 6. And did I put some parentheses around the non-chord tones in that case? Yeah. So really, you do have, not until the second beat, but you do have E, B, and E, and G. So that is a 6 chord in the EOG.
And that's the only subdominant chord, what you had as analyzed, right?
You mean secondary dominant?
Sorry. What is
No, I got,
subdominant?
I got one more secondary dominant.
Wait, what? Oh, yeah, okay, never mind, we're good. My
I'm just trying to scan here. Yeah, I see one other secondary dominant besides that one.
Is it in major 9?
No, one more.
Well, 9 or 10, one of those two.
No, you're right. I mean, because measure 8 is kind of split,
Oh, okay.
so yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's in that second line, that second system. Mhm. Yeah. Good, other questions?
Subdominant.
Did you all analyze, did you all look at the B section closely in terms of length, motivic autonomy, and harmonic independence?
I hope so.
Okay. Good, that's fine. All right. Are we good? Should I come around and pick these up?
Send it.
All right, let's do that. Make sure your name is on paper somewhere, preferably at the top, and I'll come around and collect it.
Wayne, what's on for?
I don't know what that means.
Sub and a dominant.
Should I come back?
We need to have a little discussion.
Okay, if you bring it to me this afternoon, that will be fine. All right, so today, let me look at my notes, yeah. Today, we are going to learn about the largest form that I teach in the theory sequence. That is semesters 1 through 4. If you are a performance major, you probably are required to take form and analysis before you graduate. If you are not a performance major and you're a field endorsement major, you probably don't have to take that class. But you could, I guess, for an elective if you need an extra credit here or there. Anyways, form and analysis, I teach even larger forms than what we get to in theory. Those are called sonata form and rondo form and variation form, things like that. But what we're going to talk about today is a form that's big enough that it's got sections, and each of the, some of the sections, if not all of the sections, are in and of themselves rounded binaries or ternaries. Okay? So sometimes 1, 2, or all 3 sections of a ternary form, such as ABA, sometimes 1, 2, or all 3 of those sections are each a form of their own. So you may imagine or picture it like this. We have A, we have B, and we have A. And the A section, the B sections, they're each forms of their own. Like for instance, this might be its own rounded binary, which I'll abbreviate RB. And this might be a rounded binary in and of itself. And this might be, well, if that's a rounded binary, this might be a rounded binary. Yeah.
Are we gonna get a handout or should we be?
We are going to get a handout. You're right. Yeah, you're right. So when one or more sections of a ternary form is in itself a binary or ternary form, we call the overarching ternary form composite ternary. So, well, I'll wait till we get to the handout, but I'm talking about like, what is this ultra super large ABA, capital ABA? We will call that composite ternary. Another term for composite, which means the same thing, some books will use it, it is compound ternary. It means the same thing. I'm not going to use the term compound ternary just because you have enough formal terms that start with C already in your brain, in your data bank, right? So now I'm throwing another C term at you. Right? When we talk about a period, the melodies of the two phrases of the period can be parallel or contrasting. That's a C term. When we talk about the harmonic content of a period, it can be either complete or progressive. That's a C term, complete. When we talk about the harmonic structure of a whole rounded binary or a ternary, that could be sectional or continuous. There's a C term. And finally, the fourth and final C term I'm giving you is composite ternary. And that's when you have this huge ternary form where each of the sections in and of itself is a nested or embedded smaller rounded binary or ternary form. So there's a lot of formal hierarchical levels acting at once, simultaneously here. All right, so composite ternary. So we therefore could have the following type of composite form. Let me give you, and again, I'll give you a handout, but let me give you just a little bit of a, like for instance, you could have something like this, and you could have A, and you could have a B and an A. Haven't we been analyzing rounded binaries that look like kind of like this lately? And then here, we could have another rounded binary, but it would probably be labeled then something like this. Capital C, capital D, capital C prime. Right, because it's a different music than this. And then when we bring the A section back, then we have what we had at the beginning again. We have A, B, and A prime. So each of the three sections of a massive, colossal ternary form could be in and of itself its own ternary or rounded binary form. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay? Now, this form, although it's a pretty generic or crude diagram, this form actually reflects the layout of the standard minuet and trio, which serve as the third movement of a classical era sonata or symphony. So if you've ever listened to a classic, like Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, if you've ever listened to a sonata for any instrument or symphony by those composers, generally the third movement is cast in this huge, what's called composite ternary form. And what happens is that the composer will call, well, they don't call it the big capital A section, they call this the minuet. This is referred to as the trio, and then the minuet is repeated again at the end. They go back to the beginning and play the minuet again. And you get a lot of mileage for a limited amount of music. For instance, the composer will only write out this and this. The composer will not write out this at all. But you know that the minuet, you have to go back to the beginning and play the minuet again, because generally at the end of the trio, near the last measure, in italics or in small print, it says something like Menuetto da capo. Does anyone know what da capo means? Are you brushing up on your Latin? Da capo means to the head. So you go to the head, the beginning of the minuet. That's what it means. Go back to the head of the beginning of the minuet. Okay? So, although the minuet was written out only once, the designation Menuetto da capo at the end of the trio directed the performer to go back and play the minuet once more, this time without observing repeats. So basically what you have is you have I mean, it's not, only this much is written out. But what you would hear is you would hear minuet, trio, and then you'd hear minuet again. So that makes it colossal, huge ABA form. And that's called composite ternary, because the minuet is a form in itself, and the trio is a little form in and of itself as well. Okay. Now, the minuet trio minuet scheme creates what's called a sectional composite ternary. And I'll see if I can explain to you why it's called sectional. Hopefully you remember that in any rounded binary or ternary form, at the end of the first large A section, if there's a tonic chord in the home key, that makes the entire form sectional, correct? Remember that? Okay. Well, the minuet, do you think the key that it starts in, do you think it's going to end on a tonic chord in the home key? Yeah, it is. It's usually, 100% of the time it does, all right? So since this is a self-contained piece, a self-contained form, let's say it's in the key of G, it starts in the key of G, you're going to end up with a G major chord on tonic chord in the key of G major at the end. So composite ternaries are they're generally always sectional. Composite ternaries are very rarely, if ever, continuous. They're always, pretty much always sectional composite ternaries, okay? All right, so let's take a look at, the handout that I went back to my office to get, and let me give you that. What we have on this handout, you'll note, is we'll listen to this. This is the third movement of Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik, and on the back is I've graphed the form of everything, so we can see how it fits together. So let's take one of these, and hopefully this example, this concrete example, will help make it a little more meaningful to you. A little more. All right, before I play this recording, I want you to note that the left side, basically almost to the very end, that is the minuet, or the big, huge, colossal capital A section. The trio you can starts 3 bars from the end of the left side, and that goes all the way to the end of the page, and that's your big capital huge B section. And then notice how at the very last measure of the trio, what does it say in italics there? Go ahead and read it. Menuetto da capo, which means go back to the beginning of the minuet and play the minuet again. So that's how we get, even though it's not all written out, that's how we get A, B, and A. All right? Now, if you turn the sheet over and look at the form, do you see how I've graphed the minuet over on the left? Do you see how I've decided that's a sectional rounded binary? In fact, I want to say 2 or 3 assignments ago, I think it was page 185 in your workbook, you had an assignment to graph that very portion, just the minuet. And I think you all, from what I remember, you all came up with sectional rounded binary. That's on page 185 in your workbook. Okay. I did not ask you to graph the trio. I graphed the trio for you. Do you see that on your sheet as well? That I found is a sectional rounded binary in and of itself as well. And then of course the minuet, when you repeat it, when it comes back at the end, it'll be the same form as it was at the beginning. So it's a sectional rounded binary. But what I want you to see is that overall, we have at the top, we have this huge A, huge B, huge A, and we call all of that a composite ternary form. In fact, down at the bottom, you see in the box, it's called sectional composite ternary. Okay? Why is it sectional? Well, because I just explained to you that there is a tonic chord in G major at the end of the minuet, and that's in the home key of the whole thing. The whole movement is basically in G. Okay? Now, why is it ternary? Why isn't it composite rounded binary? Well, do you remember how we decide between rounded binary and ternary? We look at the B section of our overall form. So we're going to actually look at the trio. Let's look at the trio's length. I even wrote on the front side, I wrote how many measures long the minuet is and the trio is. Do you see that? How many measures long is the minuet? 16. And how many measures long is the trio? 20. Okay. If this, the B section, is longer than the A section, is that a check for rounded binary or ternary? Ternary. Okay? Take a look at the letter labels of all the phrases. C's and D's and E's and all that stuff. Is any of the music in the trio dependent on or similar to the music in the minuet? Yes or no? Based on these letter labels. No, it's not, right? Because all of this is labeled with A's and B's. This music is labeled with C's, D's, and E's. So, motivically speaking, or melodically speaking, is that a check for rounded binary or ternary? It's ternary, right? Because it's different music. It's motivically autonomous. Different music. And then finally, take a look at the key that I tried to insert there on the left of the trio form. Is the key different than the key of the minuet? Yeah, what's the key of the trio? D major. Okay. And does the B section, the big B section or trio, does it end with a PAC in a different key? Yeah. It ends with a PAC in D. If it ended with a half cadence in G, that would be a check for rounded binary. But the whole trio, since it's a self-contained piece, it's ending with a PAC in a different key than the home key of G, so that's a check for ternary. So do you see there are three clear checks that make this whole B section, the trio, that make this stand alone, substantial, big B, right? Not wimpy B. And so since this B is hefty, we're going to call the whole thing a ternary form rather than a rounded binary form. I hope we used to do that at this little level here, but we're doing that now at this huge level, overarching level as well. Okay? All right. Now, let's go ahead, since I explained a little bit about this, let's go ahead and listen to this. I do have this up on YouTube, so we should be able to hear it. Start at the beginning and play. Comes the D section. C prime. Repeat. And C prime. Go back to the minuet. No repeats this time. now I just noticed that on my trio graph, I think I have C, not C prime, correct?
It
Yes.
cancels, so it doesn't play.
Thank you.
Unit physics is set apart from other departments.
University of Northern Iowa Physics, yikes. No thanks, I'm trying to quit. Okay. How do I go back to the Mozart? Just hit back.
Yeah, just hit the back button.
There we go. And stop, okay. Okay, yeah, I think you have just a regular C, not a C prime on your, but I was trying to show you what phrase or what part of the overall form you were listening to it. Notice that the first time you hear the minuet, the repeats are observed. So I'll put those in here. And when the trio is played, the repeats are observed as well. But when the minuet is repeated, the repeats are ignored. The second time the minuet comes around, it just plays straight through. No repeats that time. Okay? All right. Now, let's see here. So, as performed, the entire third movement of Mozart's Eine Kleine Nachtmusik is a sectional composite ternary. Sectional composite ternary. This is my overall final answer. Okay? The reason it's sectional composite ternary is because of the independence of the trio, right? So I can call the whole thing ternary. Okay? The PAC in G major right here, because this starts in G and G is the home key for really the whole piece. This makes it sectional, because at the end of the first large A section, we do have a tonic chord in the home key of the piece. Okay, yeah. All right, so let me ask, does anyone, first of all, have any questions about this? Are you seeing the kind of the hierarchical level? See, before we started this unit, we were reviewing phrases and periods right here at the phrase level. The last several weeks, we've been dealing with rounded binaries and ternaries, these kinds of forms here at this level. And today, what we're actually dealing is with a ginormous overarching ternary form in which each of the three sections is a rounded binary form. So I hope you're able to grasp the different hierarchical levels of form and see how something like this fits together pretty nicely, because you have A, you have a digression or contrast, and then you have a return or recurrence of opening material after a digression or contrast, which is what all of these little rounded binary and ternary forms are based on also. All right, what I think I'd like to do then is I think I'd like to listen to this one more time. This next time, I don't know what you followed the first time we played it, but if you could maybe follow the graph on the back instead of following the music itself the next time I play it, and see if you can identify what phrase we're in, and so on and so forth. back to the minuet. No repeats. Phrase small B. Phrase small A sharp. Again, composers can get quite a bit of musical mileage out of this, especially when you observe the repeats, and then you have digression, and then you have return of opening material again. So, and again, I think you have to really appreciate all of what Mozart is putting into this music. Not only is it good music, but it's organized so well so that the listener can follow it. It's organized purposely in that sense, so that the listener can follow where you're going. So I guess what the main thing I want you to do from today is I want you to remember composite ternary. I want you to remember that term. And I want you to remember how composite ternary means at least one, if not all, of the sections of this huge ternary are a smaller form in and of itself, whether it's a rounded binary or a ternary form as well. Okay? Now, the next thing I'd like us to do is, how many of you have your workbook with you today?
Oh, yeah.
I'd like you to open up to page 192. So I can get you started and give you a few pointers and hints for your next assignment. Your assignment for Wednesday is going to be a composite ternary. Composite ternary. Oh, let's see if I can find this on YouTube. You'll have at least a workbook to look at, or if you don't, can you move to somebody that somebody that does have one so you can see? It should be on page 192. Is that the beginning of a Haydn something or other?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now notice, at least in my book, Haydn, instead of calling the first part a minuet, he calls it like a finale or an allegro, but that's the same thing as our minuet here. Do you see the trio? Let's see, for yours, does the trio start on the bottom of the same page on the next page? Yeah, do you see how the trio starts on the next page? Okay. So think of the finale as your minuet, and then you got your trio. And since I have it here, let's go ahead and listen to that.
Exercise 20, 1E.
I was not expecting that. All right, so what I want to do now is I want to give you the homework handout. And, you know, this is not necessarily going to be easy form analysis, okay? But as long as you can keep your place, keep an idea of where you are overall in the mini form as well as overall in the composite ternary form, I think you should be okay. The finale in and of itself, I'm telling you, is a rounded binary or a ternary. The trio, as its own separate standalone piece, is a rounded binary or a ternary. All right, so let's take a look before, take this, and I'll give you just a few more hints after you get this. I try to give you a lot of help to follow along with this piece. Okay, so the way this handout is organized is as follows. Section 1 at the top, I just ask you to do some real generic graphing of the whole piece. See that? Roman numeral 1, the whole piece. Okay. You want to make sure you read everything on this handout so you're following along. Then section 2, down on the bottom of the front side, I ask you to look at the trio. I ask you to look at the trio first because the trio I find is easier to analyze for form than the minuet, or the finale, whatever you want to call it. Okay? So I'm going to ask you to graph the trio there and answer a question or two. Then on the back side, I've even started helping you graph the minuet. I think the minuet, or the finale, whatever you want to call it, that's the hardest. So I've started your graph there, and I've given you some hints that you want to read to fill out your graph. And then I ask you what the form you think of the minuet is. And I even give you that chart there with length, motivic autonomy, and harmonic independence, so you can place check marks on either side as you feel necessary. Yeah, that's about, I think, all I'm going to have for this. So again, read this, follow the instructions, and hopefully it'll help you as you make your way through it for Wednesday. I anticipate some questions on Wednesday, but you never know. Does anyone have any questions about the homework assignment, about composite ternary form, about the Haydn piece, or anything before we go? It looks like we're going to end a few minutes early. All right, then we'll go ahead and break here. Please do listen to the Haydn Piano Sonata recording either on YouTube or you can find it on the workbook recordings. That'll help you in your analysis. And we'll see you all on Wednesday.
Okay, you better not lose this one. I'm not writing my name on it until like 10 minutes.
Yeah, you want to get breakfast?
No. Why? I'm not risking.
Why not?
I'm not risking getting
Well, I won't be sitting in it probably.
No. I can't risk it.
But